Mr. Shenoy, it's a great honor to be talking to you. You've been associated with Bosch since 1986 and have spent more than 2 decades in leadership role at Bosch. You're a member of the Executive Management Board, Mobility Solutions at Bosch. Tell us about your journey. What has been the learnings, the joys, and of course, tell us about the struggles along the way.
Yeah, hi Shradha. Thanks for that nice question. Yeah, it's clear that coming from middle class family and completing engineering at NITK, initially it was very important for me to join a job and get salary. Of course, I was choosy in where I would like to work, and I was glad that I was able to get into MICO at that point in time, which was more in mobility, combination of electronics and mechanical stuff and software. And that is where I joined. And the main idea was to develop systems for precision machines and developing robust systems for the plant. That was, I guess, initial phase in the smart factory. After I worked for a few years there, in 1990, there was something which totally changed. One was there was a German who came to India to look at the possibility to develop software for high-tech domain, that is for automobiles. Same year on Valentine's Day, I don't know how many of you remember, we had an air crash in Bangalore. Almost 92 people died on that day. And the main cause for it, as it was explained at that point in time, was due to failure of fly-by-wire. So as this German put it, he said this was fly-by-wire, and we are talking about drive-by-wire for mobility. And all the vehicles will have more and more electronics as we go forward. And that is what we are looking for, engineers to develop it. I was quite excited and, of course, joined this team. I was in Germany working with a couple of German associates there. And in 1990, in October, when the East and West Germany unified, that was the time we first landed up there. We had interesting, episodes. I would say in office, it was quite challenging because we realized that everybody speaks only in German and it was high tech and we had to learn through it, how it works. We used to spend quite a number of late evenings along my other colleagues, Vijay and Prakash, to first solve the German language issue. That means we had to learn German. On the other side, understand the complex powertrain domain. Of course, both of them went on well, and we were able to enjoy the work at the later phase once we got comfortable with that. There were some interesting episodes even outside office. I still remember the first time I went to a dentist in Stuttgart. He asked me whether I was a son of a Maharaja and whether I went to school on an elephant, because India was not really known in Germany, and especially in smaller towns, I would guess. And later, when I went back to Germany, I was determined to take some photos from India, and I wanted to show that gentleman on how India was, and it was not just a land of snake charmers, for example.
Yeah.
Of course, that was the initial phase, and those were the types of experiences we had. And from then on, there was no looking back. And most of the phases were quite positive experiences, and I enjoyed every bit of it after that in mobility.
One thing that you've said, your Twitter, you define yourself on Twitter with this: automation is my passion. Mechatronics and gardening is where my heart is. Want to make Earth a better place. There's so many different things and different worlds in you, which is living in you. How do you keep your passion alive? And what keeps you excited about the things that you've chosen, the passion that you have?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think if you ask my wife, one thing she likes about me is the fact that I'm able to, debug anything, repair anything around the house. That was what my mother also used to like. Of course, that was more of a hobby, and I continue that, taking care of things and automating. Especially when I started automating how we water our plants in our garden, or put the lamps automatically at evening, or put the pump on. So these were hobby projects at home, and I continue doing that as well. As I put it in my as a LinkedIn video at the end of lockdown we had in India. A lot of projects I was able to complete during that phase. While I worked during most of the daytime and weekends, I worked on these projects, mostly being at home. And that gave me great pleasure. And that's exactly what I put on the Twitter handle itself. The passion for me has been always to innovate, to make this world a better place. And the tagline of Bosch, invented for life, actually fits perfectly to what I was always looking for. And I'm also today looking for. Of course, as RBI, we are looking at a mission fit for future, which means we want to be future ready and look at how we can solve the bigger problems of the world and how we can offer solutions for that, keeping sustainability in mind, of course. So whatever product we develop or solution, we would like to take care that we do not harm the nature. And that is something that's close to my heart, and that keeps me clicking. And also I enjoy doing every bit of it.
Mr. Shenoy, I have to ask you, in your leadership role, you've been in this role for over 2 decades. It comes with a lot of pressures and a lot of responsibilities. How do you deal with that? And I want to especially ask you about decision making. When the data is not fully available, and mostly it is not, how do you go about taking decision as a leader?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I started as an engineer, I was happy because most of our decision making was data based, and there was some fact, and we had to develop something around it. And we were always proven that, of course, when we are using a lot of inputs based on data, it was much easy. Many decisions, meanwhile, of course, we use a lot of data analytics as well. But even then, at leadership level, I realized that some of the decisions we have to take sometimes as on gut feel. For example, if you want to decide whether you want to allow work from home or hybrid model of working, or we want to fund a project in terms of innovation, of course, ideas look good, but we do not know exactly whether the solution can click. So many of these decisions are sometimes on gut feel. I think at this point in time, I would like to touch upon a specific aspect. I've always observed that, people used to say, if you have a problem, you sleep over it and probably it will get solved. I've felt this many times that sometimes I have some issues and till late evening, I keep struggling on it and I am not able to take a call. But then I keep it aside and then do my normal work. And sometimes early morning, I realize or get some solutions for the problem statements we had earlier. This has happened many times, and sometimes I get some new ideas early mornings. And I made it a point to keep a paper beside my bed. And if I get some ideas, because I'm not always so good at remembering. Many times I forget many things. So then I make it a point to note it down, and then I'm able to take it forward. Of course, this helps me further in some of the decisions which are to be taken on a gut feel or what we think, keeping the overall larger picture in mind. Because many times the decisions we take affect many people or impact many people, and it cannot be based only on numbers or business. We have to keep the people aspect as well. Of course, coming back to your question on pressure, of course, I have some means of ensuring that I have some hobbies, whether it's gardening, or going for a walk, or even traveling during holidays or breaks. Additionally, of course, from my wife, I learned Reiki. She's a Reiki master, Hema, and she taught me Reiki. Of course, I did only till level 2. But I definitely feel that there is something behind it. Even though as an engineer, it's very difficult to accept beyond, as an engineering mindset, to reason everything out. But something called, of course, you have an energy within you, and you have a capability to either communicate with others as well as do distant healing. And these things of Reiki give me, of course, a lot of satisfaction and peace in mind, in addition to other activities like I mentioned already. And this combination helps quite a lot to manage during the stressful situation.
I want to also ask you that, you've been instrumental in setting the hardware development and product engineering with a special focus on frugal engineering. And that caught my attention, because in the startup world, in this world that we're living in, tell us about frugal engineering and how do you build products through that?
Yeah, I guess frugality has always been a part of Indian lifestyle. We are always looking at how we can do maximum use with minimum usage of resources. Having that in our genes, I guess we normally try to do frugal engineering even in business. Of course, when we started as engineering at RBI for Indian market, especially, while we had solutions for the world, there were global platforms that were developed. We realized that we cannot implement them directly for Indian market. And it was possible with the competencies we had and deep knowledge that have been built and many experts at RBI, at Bosch. We were able to develop grounds up solutions for some of the applications we wanted. For example, when we wanted to bring with the BS4, the electronification of the engine management, whether it's for diesel, I think it was the first vehicle for Mahindra Scorpio, and for Tata Nano for managing the engine management. Both these cases were ground up solutions, and later on, these, of course, went on to the world as new platforms. In some cases, of course, the application itself was not successful. For example, Tata Nano, I wouldn't say was a success as a vehicle, but we were happy that we were able to develop frugal solutions for this. And meanwhile, it's been used in Europe and North America for small engines and power sport, for example. Similarly, of course, when I interact with some of the startups, there I see they work with minimum funds and they're able to develop minimum viable products in a speedy manner. I guess in larger companies like Bosch, it's very difficult. While I mentioned about some of the examples, but when you come about new areas, when you talk about new technologies being used, whether it is a driver assistance or automated driving or new topics which are going into the home automation, etc. There I see a lot of opportunities for startups to try them out. And later on, of course, when we want to get into scaling, we need to work together. And that is where I'm happy to interact with many of these startups. In fact, we have startup ecosystem called DNA at Bosch, where few of them I'm in direct connect with. One such example I would like to talk about is Simyog. This was a company which was based on some of the ideas that came during some of our PhD students at IISc on EMC. EMC testing is a big topic. Whatever electronics you develop, for example, if you have electronics to deploy airbag and it's on the center console in the car, and if you keep a mobile phone on top of it, it's clear that if there are radio signals from that, it can impact these electronics. And who would want the airbag to deploy suddenly when you're driving at high speed on the highway, just because you kept the mobile phone there? Yeah, these topics of EMC, which needs to be tested, of course, is very expensive. And this startup is actually looking at how we can do this more through simulation. And I'm working with them closely. And I'm sure at some point in time, we would manage with just doing simulation from tools like what comes out from this company. And we will be able to do frugal engineering for most of the products going forward.
Mr. Shenoy, tell us about some of the innovation taking place in Bosch and there's some of the disruption. The world is disrupting. How are you looking at that space? And then if you have any anecdote which you could share with us where you're seeing innovation taking place within the company.
Yeah, that's right, Shradha. It's very clear that in line with our invented for life tagline, we love innovating. Of course, whenever we innovate, it's important that we are able to link it up to the market and understand the market requirements. When it comes to mobility, I think let me start with the overall trend on aspect of the pace that is personalized, automated, connected, and electrified. This trend is there to last, and all the new features that come onto the vehicles will be in line with this as we see for next few years. Of course, this is possible only when you develop solutions, keeping all the domains and across the domains. Otherwise, typically at Bosch, we were having more of silo thinking, whether it's powertrain or whether it's safety. Each domain used to develop the products and that goes to the market, of course. But meanwhile, we see that unless we work cross-domain, the results are not going to be interesting, or it's not possible to develop what is needed for the market. Luckily, we had put across a team 2 years back. In my leadership team, we came across the idea, why not put experts from every domain together? And around 100 engineers came together to form a project called XSpace. where these domains integrated onto vehicles and they tried to develop features for India. Interestingly, this, of course, went on very well, and there are interesting use cases as well. For example, in Europe or anywhere else, you would never have, say, animals, say, a cow on the road. If you develop a system for automated driving and you have a cow on the road, obviously our system was initially detecting that as two people. Obviously, it thought two legs, yeah, one person and another person besides. And imagine what would be the decision making of such a automated driving if you purely went by this algorithm. Obviously, this team had to improvise that AI algorithm and to able to detect the correct objects. Same goes with detecting an auto rickshaw on the car, on the roads. I'm happy that these experts, they were highly motivated. In fact, when we had an event on one of the weekends, we met on a test track. There, I realized later on that to spend 2 or 3 full nights to develop, and day and night, so that the systems are good enough and we are able to get the feel of this when you test it on the test track. So that's the type of motivated engineers I see, and I think this is what has helped us to innovate from Bosch. Having such engineers and thinking about use cases which are needed for India, the emerging markets, as well as across the world for other regions. And that is what is quite interesting as well, to work with them and learn from them.
Do you track the startup ecosystem in the mobility space, and what's your view on that? And then what are some of the gaps that you see from your vantage point of being exposed to what's happening across the world?
Yeah, ecosystem, I think the startup ecosystem is definitely one which is there to stay, and it can make a big difference. Being nimble and like I mentioned, with the resource crunch they have, I think, but the ideas that they bring up onto the table is, quite mind-blogging. What I've seen is we have this DNA program where we connect with some of the startups and we try to nurture and help them in scaling them up. But the initial ideas they come with and the MVPs they prepare are really interesting. There are many in mobility space, be it in driver assistance or autonomous driving or electrification. And these spaces, even connectivity for that matter. Each one of them, I think the products and solutions they develop are really interesting, and the use cases, because lots can be done meanwhile through software. Of course, what we look for is deep tech startups, where it's a combination of the systems they use and the software algorithm they run, a lot of them with AI algorithm, either for video or any other signal what they use, and for decision making. A combination of these solutions they develop and the scalability that can be done by integrating other products from companies like Bosch, I think is a huge opportunity. Another way around, like the Simiog example I mentioned, they want to, of course, pilot this in different setups and to scale. For example, in the validation space of EMC, we have used, and many other larger companies are using such products to improve the validation cycle of our electronics. This sort of, working together with startups has given us a huge opportunity to not only use these solutions, but also allow them to scale up and take it to the world. And I think this is going to be a win-win. And we do have at Bosch what we call as Grow platform. So what we see is some of the small startup like environments we are trying to create within larger companies as well. This Grow platform is more within Bosch, and we allow our associates to also work like startups. And I think that's a new dimension of how large companies can start becoming more nimble and develop specific solutions for the market.
The new work from home, which has come since the last 1.5 years in our lives, what does it mean for you, especially as you lead in the mobility space? What does this mean, and what are some of your customers, clients asking you for now?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, pandemic has definitely impacted thousands of lives, and I think it is clear that it has impacted many families, and we are sad that we also lost few associates. My prayers are with them, and we try to do our bit to support them in whichever way, I mean, financial and otherwise. Coming to the impact itself, it had when, especially April of last year, when the wave one started. We, on one side, of course, supporting in terms of on the families as well as the associates. On the work side, what we realized is they were quite agile, all of them very much ready to work from anywhere. Most of them went back to their homes, and we enabled also to work remotely. A lot of, systems were moved to the houses. We moved 100% working from home. Within a week, we realized that we are very much back to normal in terms of productivity. I mean, all the projects which were taken up, we were able to deliver. There was no project that was actually delayed because of the pandemic. And the credit goes to each one of the associates who took this challenge and made it happen. Of course, I'm sure each one of them would have had a lot of issues to work from their home places or any other environment. But I think this has changed completely the perspective of what work from anywhere is. From this success, of course, which of course wouldn't happen. Earlier, I think 2-3 years back, we had projects called How Do We Enable Work from Home? But we never managed to come to a perfect situation where work from home was effective. But with this pandemic, it accelerated on one side. And now we are able to say that work from anywhere is possible. And this has democratized more or less across the world. That means for a project, for example, if the associate joining across the world, you don't even know where they're joining from. And they're on the equal footing. I mean, all the conversations, everybody has the same advantage or same disadvantage when they're virtually working. This has definitely flattened the world even further. And it is possible now to take up global roles anywhere in the world. That is on one side. The second is, of course, with this change on the business, things change. Of course, with less and less vehicles on the road, the overall mobility came to a standstill, more or less. But now, of course, it's picking up. The market is showing up. And also, the usage of the vehicles have changed meanwhile. We were debating on the shared mobility, for example. There was one thought that more and more will move towards shared mobility, but now we see, or we have to wait and watch what does shared mobility mean, because there is a tendency of vehicle becoming more on which are owned individually or driven individually. And this is something which you have to watch out for as well in mobility. Last aspect, or the third one, is related to what people look at in the vehicles itself, because vehicles, as we called it, becoming a third living space between office, home, and vehicles. With working from anywhere, of course, to some extent, homes and office are sort of integrating. But whenever they're going to office, and I guess certain percentage of people will definitely start coming back to office in the so-called hybrid mode. And in that case, what they're looking for when they're in the third living space is also more on features that can be used. We are not any longer looking at what is the real power of the engine or some of the basic stuff which is taken for granted, but they look at advanced features that are required in the third living space, whether with connectivity and other driver assistance features. So this development is accelerating meanwhile. We have huge projects on which we are working on, and that's the reason mobility development is speeding up meanwhile. And I guess this is an opportunity for all, those in mobility space, to even develop further to support this working from anywhere as well as hybrid working.
What would post-COVID workplaces look like? And does it change anything for you at Bosch?
Yeah, definitely, Shradha. I think the post-COVID time, we already start defining this as a hybrid model. Of course, none of us still know for sure exactly how this hybrid model will look like. And I guess we'll do a lot of learning in the next 6 to 9 months. We know that over time, working from anywhere is possible, and it's not always necessary for basics. We are able to effectively manage most of the engineering work. In fact, we have meanwhile enabling more and more labs to be remotely usable. Otherwise, during the peak of COVID as well, it was needed. Few engineers had to still manage the labs remotely. to manage labs at office so that the remote working was possible. But meanwhile, making the labs remotely accessible, even automating them to a large extent, even switching on the labs, changing the hardware, accessing and testing, driving the test scripts, etc., to ensure that whatever we develop, because all said and done at Bosch, we are doing more on engineering, and this have to be tested on the live systems. In this change scenario, we are moving more towards this usage for remote access. But at the same time, we believe that on long run, we do need some amount of, connect. The topics related to having a culture in a company and innovating together, where many people from different domains and understanding come together and spending some time and building the personal rapport with each other definitely helps. But in this change scenario, I'm sure that 100% of the people will never come back to office. Maybe we are talking about only maybe 50% or even less. In some domains, it can be even zero, of course. But another aspect is how they would interact in this hybrid model. When everybody was working remotely, then obviously people were taking care that everybody gets to interact, talk, understand, and exchange aspects and come to consensus. But when you have a hybrid mode, what we see now is when some people are in office and others are working from somewhere else, it is not necessarily very easy like when everybody was virtually working. So we need to define how this new system will look like. But hybrid working is there to stay. And I think all of us need to sort of have a fine balance on where we'll finally reach. I guess both the organizations like Bosch and the associates will have to do a lot of learning through this journey. And in the next 2 years, I guess we would come to a stable state where we know what does hybrid working mean. But I'm sure it will be a win-win for the companies as well as each one of us associates in the company. And this will be the new normal. And I guess it'll look different in each one of the countries or each company, I guess.
As a person, as an individual, as a professional, what drives you? What keeps you motivated? And how have you been able to keep your teams motivated over the years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there are several things that inspire me and motivate me, obviously, every day. But I'll talk about two main aspects on what motivates me. One is what we create which impacts the world in the future. That means whatever we develop to make this world a better place is a number one aspect which motivates. And I think that is where I enjoy. Whether when I do it at home for my projects or at office. At office, of course, we have brilliant guys who are able to come with proposals on what we need for the future. And then we try to, support them and see how we can bring about the new solutions. And this is something is for me the number one aspect. There I see, of course, the interacting with such associates has been always giving me high energy. Whether it be a software developer who has joined just 1 or 2 years back, or experts who have been in this domain for quite some time, or even interacting with other leaders from the industry, gives new ideas, and that is how we are able to move forward. This combined with the second aspect is how to develop the talent for the future. That is the second one which motivates me. Obviously, to be able to fulfill the first one and to ensure that we are able to create an environment where we have highly competent people, as well as we are able to develop their life going forward. Each one of us would like to have a better life. Of course, which means working with universities, working with various companies to be able to develop the future talent is a second dimension. That is where I enjoy also working with the universities. We are meanwhile working with, I would say top 20 or 25 universities to improve their curriculum, looking at upgrading the labs, giving internship, and also doing joint innovation. Obviously, this is a step which I started with my own university, that is NITK Suratgal, and later on started doing with many others, and gives me extreme joy. Meeting even freshers, I mean, the engineers, budding engineers in their third or final year, itself gives a lot of, I mean, energy to me when I interact with them. And I love going back there and spending some time. Second is, of course, when they come into the industry, also I've seen, in fact, I had a reverse mentor who was just less than 2 years within Bosch from his engineering, by name Adar. She was able to give me hints on how AI can be used in our industry. Of course, I read books, I also done some online courses, but is spending some time with a person like him, of course, gives additional inputs on what the current generation is looking for. It is not just the technology or a good life they would look for. They would like to look for what the purpose they're working for, the larger picture. I get the same input, of course, when I mean, discuss or spend some time with my son, Adish. He has just finished his engineering and doing his postgrad now. They're looking for, of course, purpose in life, and whatever they create, they would like to make this world a better place, and especially also looking at sustainability. And these aspects, of course, are meanwhile more important. And I think it's important that we're able to work with the younger generation very well. And that is what gives me energy as well and what motivates me going forward.
A phenomenal insight into your journey from 1986 onwards, and so much to learn, so much to take, and very, very inspiring. Thank you so much. We're just so proud to have a leader like you in our country. Thank you.